And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our gracious host tonight. I'm here at Children's Hospital Oakland Research Institute, Dr. Bertram Lubens.
Well, I'm really pleased to see everybody here, and I thought, since many of you may not have been in this library before, this is a historically preserved building. This was part of Merritt College, and it was University High School. Some of you may have family or friends that went to University High. We have a major sickle cell center in our hospital, and at one point in the history of sickle cell anemia, the Black Panthers were screening on street corners of Oakland, and this building is the home of the Black Panther Party. And that It's Good Bakery, that was, if you go in there, you have to be careful, a lot of butter. If you go in there, they have all the pictures of the history of the Black Panther Party, and this is the school that they went to. It's a beautifully preserved building. The far end is the Senior Citizen Center, North Oakland Senior Citizen Center. We lease it to the North Oakland Senior Citizen Center for $1 a year indefinitely. And that was part of our buying this building. They were going to take it down and build a shopping mall, and we were able to get it, and it's historically preserved. So when we took it over and renovated it, we did it with architects and with the Historic Society. And the roof, which were all the Spanish tiles, we had to take off the ones that were broken, number them, and then replace them individually because of the historic preservation, which is not inexpensive. And then the building that's out there is a gym. It was the gym for the high school. The big building, and on it says boys and girls above the door. And one of our scientists said we should change it to MD and PhD entrance. It's just a shell. There's nothing inside that building. There's a good roof because we had to put a roof on it, but there's nothing inside it. So I'm really pleased that you decided to have your program launch its a strategic plan here at Children's, because we are very much like what you are. We care about the same population. We want the best for all the children that we serve. I went to one of your board meetings, and I was just impressed that I could go to a board meeting of a group in our outpatient center, and it would be similar kinds of discussions. And you're going to hear that from some of the people that are here. And now we're part of the University of California, San Francisco. We're an affiliate. And by affiliation, we retained our own private, not-for-profit 501c3 status, and we have a board, and they're a public institution. But we're a private institution with a public mission, and they're a public institution with more of a private mission, I have to say. Unless you incorporate San Francisco General, which is more of the public site. But we're learning how to live together. We have a great opportunity to have a world-class program, and the benefits that we bring to this affiliation are the commitment to this community and understanding the challenges that underserved children and families have to deal with, and that's very much a part of health. And our goal, our mission, is to improve the health of all children. About 73% of the children we see here are in Medi-Cal, which means they're all low-income families. Many don't have housing. Many are in foster care. Many don't have food access. Many don't have a whole variety of things that we take for granted that we have in our lives, and they don't have, and that affects their health. So we might straighten out their cold or be sure that they're immunized, but if we really don't address these other factors, which Dana is going to talk a little bit about, we're not going to improve health. So how we do that together is really what's important. And so I think when you leave tonight, you're going to hear and hopefully feel that we're very much a part of you, and any opportunities for anything we can do together, we like to do. We have a new brand for our two institutions, and some of you may have seen the TV ads. I can't comment that there's value in TV ads because I know how expensive they are. And I think if we didn't invest in the TV ads and put that money into our community, we could probably do much more for health than the TV ads. But we have these phenomenal TV ads before the Warriors game, the night before the game, that will be on. And we have a new brand, and that's redefining possible. And you do the same thing. It's, you know, what can we do to make things better for the people and kids we serve? And so I'm looking forward to hearing tonight's presentation, and I welcome you, and you're always welcome to come here. We like to have this facility used by our community, and so think about that if there are other events. We have smaller rooms. This is our most beautiful room, and there are 4 magnificent courtyards that we have here, and at night it's not used except for the scientists that are in some of the labs. So thank you for coming, and have a wonderful week.
Our first speaker tonight is Dr. Dana Long, who is going to share with us some of the determinants of health and give you a little education on adverse childhood experiences.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. It's so nice to be here. So, my name is Dana Long, and I'm a pediatrician at the Redefining Possibilities Institute. I've been at Children's for a very long time. I started at Children's in 1999 as an intern, and I had the really great fortune of continuing here for the last, if you can believe it, 16 years. So my role at Children's is I'm an attending physician. I supervise residents. We have 90 residents here. I work in our emergency department. I work in primary care. And then I do a whole bunch of research on really cool topics, such as social determinants of health. And so I was asked to come here today by Josh to really just define some terms for you. I could talk about this stuff for hours, but what I'm going to do is provide you with some definitions that will help to lay the groundwork for the new strategic plan. So my objectives, again, are to define social determinants of health, how it relates to health inequities, and to understand adversity and toxic stress. So social determinants of health. My definition of social determinants of health are everything about where a child lives, eats, sleeps, plays, prays, goes to school. They're social and environmental factors that surround the child and then impact health outcomes. This picture here, so this is off of the 580, right when you go downtown, and this is a picture of the Oakland Hills. And the reason why that's important is because I want to talk about how social determinants play out just living within miles of each other. So this is our beautiful city. This is northwest Oakland Hills, so Montclair. This is west Oakland and east Oakland. So there's a 7-mile distance between these places. And in that 7 miles, so a white child that's born in Montclair compared to an African American child that's born in West Oakland can expect to live 14 years fewer. Every mile between here and, Montclair and west and north Oakland, it reduces your life expectancy by 2 years. So the life expectancy in West Oakland is 71 compared to 85 years in the hills. And how does this translate to a difference in life expectancy across the lifespan of a person? So let's take this white child who's born in the hills compared to an African American child that's born in West Oakland. As an infant, that child is 2 times more likely to be low birth weight, 12 times less likely to have a mother who graduated from college. As a child, they're 13 times more likely to live in poverty, 4 times less likely to read at grade level, and this is 3rd grade reading level. And for those of you in the educational field, you know that 3rd grade reading level is very predictive of graduation rates. And then as an adult, that child is now 5 times less likely to be employed, 3 times more likely to die of a stroke. That causes a cumulative impact of 14 years in life expectancy from living 7 miles from another person. So what does this mean to our community? And as Dr. Lubin so graciously said, our community is your community. We're serving the same kids. So I decided, and this was about 3 years ago, that I really wanted to find out what were the social and environmental factors that are impacting our children that in no way, shape, or form are we as pediatricians addressing systematically whatsoever? What are those issues? So the gold standard in medicine is something called a randomized control trial. It's all about evidence. It's all about piloting best practices, collecting data. So we randomly approached over 700 families in our emergency department. In our emergency department, we see about 32,000 patient visits a year, and of those 32,000 visits, about 70% of our families are on public assistance. They're on Medi-Cal. In our primary care clinic, 98% of our patients are on Medi-Cal, and we see about 34,000 patient visits there. So we randomly assign families to answer some questions about their unmet social and environmental needs, either on a tablet or in person. And this is what we found out. That almost 80% of our families say they ran out of food, they ran out of money at the end of the month. 70% of families are concerned about their health insurance. Almost 60% ran out of food at the end of the month. 50%, half are concerned about the safety of their child in their neighborhood and at school. And almost half are concerned about the mental health of the primary caregiver of the child. Yet, as a doctor, I don't address any of these issues on a routine, systematic basis. So how do we actually start to change the paradigm of medicine? This relates to ACEs. How many of you guys are aware of the ACEs survey? Okay, that's awesome because it means that I don't have to explain it in great detail. So the ACEs survey, it stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. It was conducted in the late 1990s at Kaiser Hospital in conjunction with the Center for Disease Control. It was done by two physicians, Anda and Vitelli, and what they did is they took 17,000 mostly Caucasian, mostly middle class, mostly white Kaiser members in San Diego, and they asked them, hey, think about your childhood. Tell us about some adverse experiences, and there were three types. There's abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. So within the abuse category, that could be physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. Neglect is either physical or emotional, and household dysfunction is either depression, domestic violence, divorce, drug use, or incarceration. Tell us about these experiences, and then they looked at healthcare utilization data and disease outcomes. And they found something really shocking. What they found is that for people early in life who had adversity, there was not only increased at-risk behavior, such as increased risk of attempted suicide, increased risk of drug use, increased risk of alcoholism, but there were actually physical consequences to adversity that happens early on in life. So it's not just that you have behavior that puts you at risk, it's actually that you have disease, right? And so it's actually that you have ischemic heart disease, that you have cancer, that you have diabetes, I could add to this list, that you're obese, that you have asthma. And there was a follow-up study to this. It was recently published. It's called The Hidden Crises. And we looked at data actually throughout the nation and particularly in California. And we actually discovered that 2/3 of Californians have at least one type of major childhood trauma. And are we addressing this? You know, we spend so much money on asthma, obesity, hypertension. Has anyone ever thought, well, actually, let's go upstream. Let's actually see if we can prevent these things from happening in the first place. So if we look at this ACEs data in California, we know that if your ACE score is more than 4, so you have more than one type of adversity, you're more likely to have asthma. The blue bars are the ACEs, are high ACEs. You're more likely to have asthma. You're more likely to smoke. You're more likely to have risky sexual behavior. You're more likely to have chronic lung disease. You're less likely to obtain a master's degree, and you're more likely to be depressed. We also know, because we're interested in schools and education, that those kids that actually are diagnosed with learning and behavioral issues, a lot of them have really high ACEs. And what it begs is for us to really shift our lens. And so the question is not, what's wrong with this child, right? It's what happened to this child. So what is stress? There are lots of different types of stress. And there's a brilliant man who Dr. Lubin and I had the great opportunity to meet. His name is Dr. Jack Shinkoff. He runs the Harvard Center for the Developing Mind. He defines some terms that are very helpful. So positive stress. Positive stress is you're giving a lecture. You are going on a date, right? You get a little bit nervous and then it goes away. Tolerable stress is if something pretty significant happens to you, but yet you have your family, you have your friends, and it's intermittent. So your grandmother dies, there's an earthquake. It's a serious stress, but given buffering relationship with caregivers, the stress goes away. And then there's toxic stress. This is when you have constant adversity all the time without buffering relationship with caregivers. And what we know is that all of these things, determinants of health, adversity, stress, they actually do get under our skin in a very biologic way. So they change our hormones. There's something that's called the hypothalamic pituitary axis. Basically what this is it's your fight or flight response. So this is actually a true story. When I was 20, I told my mother that I was going to go camp out in the savannah in Africa. And my mom's like, well, where do I call you? You can't call me. There's no phone there, but I'm going to be all right. So I did this project with the School for Field Study in Kenya. We were staying on safari territory, and there was a group of us, and we were really, really hot. And so we go to this watering hole so we can cool off. We didn't know that a hippopotamus, I know this is a rhinoceros, but it was a hippopotamus. So this hippopotamus, we didn't know it was the home for this hippopotamus. And this hippopotamus comes running out of the pond, like attacking us, right? And I've never run so fast in my life. And I ran so fast, secondary to my hypothalamic pituitary axis. It's great for surviving, right? But it's not so good when you're a child, right? It's not so good when that rhinoceros hippopotamus comes home every single night continuously. We also know that stress increases inflammation. Inflammation leads to all kinds of terrible things like heart disease, asthma, obesity, and learning issues. We know that adversity actually changes our genetic code. And this is super profound because we used to think that our genetic code was something that was static. You're just born with it. But what we actually learned is that moments, instants, can change the way that your genetic code reads. And so growing up with adversity, it doesn't actually change those little base pairs that you learned about in biology. It changes the switches that tell your genetic code which proteins to translate. We also know that it changes the type of bacteria that's in your system. And we know that social determinants and adversity actually affect brain development. So that 80% of your brain develops by the time you're 3 years of age. You have this amazing ability to process information, to create these synapses. And if you don't have the proper nurturing environment with a buffering relationship with the caregiver, you don't develop as many synapses and connections, and you never get that time back. So this is my big picture. I hope it's your big picture. So my big picture is that you have all these biologic things, epigenetics, your hormonal axis, inflammation, your microbiome, and they're influenced by our environment, by poverty, by economic conditions, by lack of food, by our built environment, by trauma and adversity, by housing, by racism, by education, and then we see poor health outcomes. So in summary, we know how early childhood experiences and stress have lifelong outcomes and how our early environment changes our biology and then affects future generations. So really, this is all about resilience though, right? I mean, we could say that we know trauma and stress are harmful, but that's not really getting us anywhere. We really have to shift from a deficit-based to a strength-based model and ask ourselves, how can we actually improve our environment to create more stable, resilient communities? So this is my model of how we do this. I think it looks a lot like your model. There's everything from screening for trauma, prevention, right? That's the goal. We want to prevent this from happening. But if it does happen, how can we actually promote healing and improve health outcomes? And the whole community is involved in this effort, as well as collecting data, training our next generation of teachers and providers, promoting evidence-based best practices, and then using technology. So at this point, I'm going to leave you in very capable hands of Josh, who's going to talk to you about what you guys are doing about this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Dr. Long. We certainly appreciate that. We are honored for our next speaker to have with us Bishop Funder, who is the senior pastor at the City of Refuge United Church of Christ here in Oakland, and also the presiding bishop at the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. And she's going to share her experiences with the community. Oh, yes.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. It's just splendid to be in this room, this close to the history of the Black Panther Party. That's pretty serious. Couple things. I want to, first of all, thank you very kindly for the invitation to be here and to be able to talk about something that is as close to my heart as the health and the forward movement and the success of our children and young people. Thank you very much for the presentation on social determinants of health. And there's a few things I think I'd like to share from our experience of doing this work. I've been a pastor for 33 years and love my work, feel very suited to it, and that makes us have at least 2 good generations within our congregation that have passed through and by us. And we have some wonderful stories to tell. We have some very painful stories to tell as a result of that reality. So there are a few things I'd like to say in my brief time tonight. One is that we have moved after 23 years of being in San Francisco. We moved back to the East Bay, and we are in the corridor that is in the industrial area just above the Oakland Airport. And so we are on the industrial side as versus on the community side, the housing side, or the neighborhood side, and across from Denny's. Some of you all know Hagenberger, you know kind of where that is. One of the things I'd like to lift up that I know is a reality and that we are seeking to address is the presence of what we call the green desert. The fact that in our community, on the corner where we are, there is a Burger King, a McDonald's, a Jack in the Box, a Denny's, 3 gas stations, all of which have fast food areas. And every day that we are there, we watch people coming from work who are on their way to Sagrani Park, on their way back around to 98th. They stop and make very long lines at all of those food places. They have very large bags when they come out, and they are basically coming from work and they're going home to feed their children and to feed themselves. One of the realities I know of having raised 2 generations with our congregations over these years is a lot of what our children are dealing with is the absence of affordable good food. And in certain neighborhoods, that is almost impossible to get. And someone said, well, it doesn't take a long time to cook fresh food and fresh vegetables and to acquire fresh food and fresh vegetables. I know way too many families where there's only one working parent, and oftentimes that person comes back home to latchkey kids, and when they get home to them, for all intents and purposes, they will have had to get there quickly from work and through traffic and bring some food, and they're going to go to a fast food place. They're going to go there because they can afford it, and they're going to go there for all intents and purposes, again, because that is what is in the hood. That's the truth. So one of the things we have had to address, and we talk about often, is that the disproportionate health realities in the African American community, communities of color, are disproportionate. Out of the 16 health disparities, 14 are overrepresented among African Americans, many of which, most of which are food-based. That has everything to do with heart trouble and cancer and high blood pressure and diabetes, and we can go on and on and on. That's a part of our reality. And that some of our children who are living on processed food and sugar, and lots of sugar, and extraordinary amounts of sugar as a reward, oftentimes for good behavior and such, Those children have activity issues. They come to school, they are labeled as hard to get along with, as behavior problems, and the end result is they get in a pipeline. And there's a pipeline to failure for a lot of our children that is really based in a whole lot of sugar before they start the day. So I wanted to lift up to you the importance of ending green deserts in our communities and then say a little bit more about that. The other thing that is a reality for us is because of our disconnect from insurances and the inability to work the insurance system for health systems. And it's one thing to have the insurance, it's quite another to know how to work it and make it go. I look at folks, my partner is a breast cancer survivor. And when you have breast cancer and you have to get in for treatment and for mammograms, the luxury of time to be able to go for the treatment when you have 2 or 3 kids and you have to work is a very different reality. We lived in Marin County when she was in treatment. And that was a much easier road to hoe when you don't have to work and you can go to treatment in Marin. And I remember saying to her one day, I wonder what do women do who have 3 kids and have to go to work every day. And they have to come in for chemotherapy and the accompanying nausea and sickness that's associated with that. How do they manage their lives? And in many cases, I suspect that they don't. Something has to give way. So even good treatment and access to care is to some degree a privilege. And there are certain privileges associated with that. And so a lot of folks in the communities where I serve use the emergency rooms for primary care for their children. They take them in when they have a really high fever as versus taking them for preventive care. So there's a huge need, and I will get to a couple of the things that we're doing, but I just think it's important for me to say what my experience has been in serving. The other is the idea that because we are, on every block we have 15 churches, you would think that we really had it going on, you know what I mean? We have churches, honey, all on the same block, it's the truth. But we have, our religion is oftentimes what I call eschatologically based. Essentially, we are hoping that one of these days we're going to get out of here and then we're going to go to heaven and everything's going to be all right. Because it seems like we cannot find any real concrete answers to what it is that we need in a more immediate way. Because we are living in the inner city, and our folks come from East Oakland, West Oakland, from Richmond, from still across the bay from San Francisco as far as Bayview and Hunters Point. We have folks that come from all of these places with their kids. And many of them have lost their boys. We have 3 boys in our church that we raised, all of which were lost to gun violence. And there's a certain pain associated with that permeates our reality, because a lot of the folks that are raising little boys, particularly the little boys, are thinking, so what can I do to avoid that reality for my sons? And this presence of violence and lack of positive activity in the community does create a very dangerous environment, I would say, for a lot of these young boys. It also creates a certain environment for our young girls. And I shared when we talked on the phone about this event tonight, the work we do with the Department of Education around sex trafficking for young girls. I'm sure that many of you are aware that there was an information piece that went out from the Department of Education and the federal government suggesting that our schools are one of the primary targets for sex trafficking for young girls. And where certain kinds of things are inaccessible to these children and impossible for them to get, somebody comes along and says to them, I'll give you a lot of money, I'll hook you up, and this is what we're expecting from you. It doesn't start that way. It starts with gifts, opportunities, and things that kids can't afford, activities, trips, and then it moves from that to the point at which young girls in particular have to pay for these things with their bodies. And so the question is, what do we do? What can we do? I would encourage you to get that piece from the Department of Education, because it is very detailed in terms of what is happening in the schools, and we don't know enough about it, primarily because we cannot imagine it in some of the schools in the neighborhoods where we are. But I have to say to you that this is a real and present danger for our girls. So what can we do? We started working on this as a faith-based organization. One of our primary goals is nutrition, doing something about nutrition. And we did everything from now having a garden where we're growing our own collard greens and kale and tomatoes and fruit and spices. And somebody said, you can't feed a whole neighborhood with a garden, but you can teach children, for one thing, that food doesn't come from Safeway. And they're amazed that you can actually put a seed in dirt and it come up and be a plant. That's an amazing thing. Then it gives us the opportunity to talk about the nutritional value that is in this fresh food. Begin to talk to them, to begin to retrain their palate. Help them to understand what healthy food tastes like and how healthy food can be prepared, and consequently also train your parents. What we can do about offering services. We partnered with the unions. We bought the building trades union building right on Eads, AFL-CIO building, 31,000 square feet of space. And in that space, we have some apprenticeship programs already with our young men who are apprenticing with the unions and doing something with that energy that is proactive and positive, but also preparing them to be part of the workforce. Talking about mental health and licensing our leaders and ministers to provide mental health interventions in the families. I know I don't have long to talk about it, but I can say to you that the inner city is the third world of the United States. And there are a lot of mental health issues, and it's an intergenerational reality. When those issues exist in the parents and in the parenting aunts and uncles and grandparents, the children, they catch it from their folks. And it just moves on from generation to generation. And so if we're going to do intervention for the young people, we have to do intervention with their parents in order to make that work. And ending what I call these generational curses and doing something about this stinking thinking and stinking theology, sisters and brothers, which I find so problematic in terms of folks thinking it's all going to be resolved in eternal life, that we have some things we have to do in this life to make this happen. So here are my stories, and I'm done. We have 2 4-children sibling groups that were raised in our congregation. One is an older sibling group, the other is a younger sibling group. And this is a quick story. The older sibling group are now age 21, 23, 25, something like that, 28. They are about in that age group. Their adoptive parent, who was a foster parent, at the point at which she began to be ill, and she had several different kinds of lifestyle, food-related issues. The other day, she passed away from congestive heart failure. And when she was getting ill and less present, the less present she became, the more the kids started to go away into other activities without supervision. And the girls, it started with the girls because the boy's the youngest. They just started not going to school, not showing up, not being present, and largely because there were the controls that used to exist in the family no longer were there. And someone said, well, then why didn't social workers, anybody know about social workers? Am I offending anybody in the room? Social workers? Why didn't the social workers do something about it? The caseloads are so large. All the children would be there when the social worker came. As soon as the social worker left, they would dissipate again. Because without the children being present, the money didn't come into the household. Without the money coming into the household couldn't survive. That was their reality. They dissipated such that we lost track of all of the girls. And when the mother died, the boy who was living on Section 8 with the mother didn't know where his sisters were, didn't know how to tell the landlord that the mother had died. And for about 3 weeks, she didn't know. The mother was at Sutter at the morgue, And Sutter was threatening to do with her what is done with indigents who are unclaimed, because the boy is only 21 years old. And someone said, so what do you do in a case like that? Well, we got a better opportunity with the younger people, because this mother didn't disclose to us what all of her realities were. We have a younger sibling group where there's an older sister and 3 younger brothers. And what we did with that group is we got in touch with the foster care system. Their mother had recidivism in and out of jail over and over and over for drug-related cases, and they wanted to reunite her with her children. And every time she came out of jail, she would pass a couple tests and they'd reunite her with her children. And then something would happen again. And so what we did is we developed within our congregation people who would catch the children when she was in trouble again. And there were 3 or 4 families that the children stayed with when she was in trouble again. She's been clean and sober for about 2 years, but we're really keeping a good watch on her. And we're watching for the signs and the indicators, you feel me? Because we learned something from this sibling group that we didn't learn. So we're all in her business, all in her mix. We found out that secrets kill and nosy is really good, okay? So we're all in her business. And here is the final story, and it's my story. I was a child who survived physical abuse. My father was a Korean War veteran, a good church boy who went away to war and came back, my mother said, very different than the man that left home. He was probably diagnosably suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. But my father didn't know what was wrong with him. And he would have these spats of violence. And there was a time that I was in the hospital for a period of time for skull fractures and concussions and things of that nature. And I got straight A's in school all the time. But if you pushed me the wrong way just a little bit, didn't take a lot. I remember this, just a little bit. I was prone to come for you, if you understand what I mean. And so I was thought of as a kid that had violent tendencies. And I remember that I got into an altercation or two when I was in school, and they called my mother and told my mother that I was going to have to be put into a special group of children. And what was about to happen to me when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I was about to be pipelined to failure. There's no question about it. Had they done to me what had been the plan for me, that my straight A's couldn't have saved me from being in the special class where special kids go. And I would have had that experience probably all the way from 2nd or 3rd grade into the prison industrial complex in some way. But my mother went to school and she asked the question when I got into it with a boy named Sean, who hit me in the eye one day. And when they found him, I was beating him up with my lunch pail. Some of you all remember when lunch pails were metal. They weren't always this recyclable stuff that we use now. They used to be metal with a handle, and you could change somebody's life with a lunch pail, right? Well, I took after this boy with a lunch pail. My mother asked the operative question. She said, "What did Sean do to my daughter?" The people said, but she beat him up with a lunch pail. She said, "What did Sean do to my daughter?" Well, she put bumps all on. What did Sean do to my daughter? And my mother stayed there, and she advocated for me until the decision was made not to put me in the special class, but rather to get me the kind of counseling that I needed to counter the kind of violence that I was experiencing in my home. Had my mother not done that, and shortly after divorced my father, I have no way of knowing what my life would have been like. That's the kind of involvement that organizations like our church have to get involved with, all the community organizations, and whatever help we can do to talk to community leaders about changing these statistics for children regarding health, regarding violence, regarding food, whatever we can do to change those realities, get involved with us because we are the people who have our feet on the ground. God bless you.